Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ocean Geographic Forum session live on wet markets and wildlife. This is a session that we've been talking about for quite some time. We want to do this session, and it took us a while for us to gather this expert panel with us today, which will actually define and explain what is wildlife and wet markets. I mean, I grew up in Singapore, in Asia. I think there's a lot of misconception, misinterpretation of the term wet market. To us, wet market is a culture. We go there to shop for our food, and to tell us to say close all wet market, I think it's in a way it's wrong, and in a way rude, because it's just like us telling you guys in Australia, in the States, or elsewhere, to close all your supermarket. So here with us today, we have Sylvia to do an opening address for us. And let me just give a quick introduction to Sylvia. Sylvia is the founder of Mission Blue, Sylvia Earle Alliance, founder of Ocean Exploration and Research, and founder of Deep Hope. And she's the author of more than 230 publications, leader of 100 expeditions with more than 7,500 hours spent underwater. She's the recipient of more than 150 national and international honors and awards. And of course, she's named Time Magazine First Hero for Our Planet. She's a living legend by the Library of Congress, Netherlands Order of the Golden Ark. But in my book, she is a living treasure for our blue planet. So, Dr. Sylvia Earle, please take it away.
Thank you, Michael, for a really generous introduction. But during this event, I really look forward to listening and learning more than expressing solutions to what we clearly see as a problem, that being that loss of nature, the natural systems, has unleashed so much woe upon us. And it goes everything from what we're doing to wildlife generally, to changing the chemistry of the planet, the temperature of the planet. It's just that with the current pandemic, our focus is on how we treat animals that we take to market, and how that comes back to haunt us. I don't think this is, at least it's certainly not for me, meant to be any kind of condemnation, cultural condemnation. It's just a fact that throughout our history, human history, we have relied on our neighbors, wildlife, wild animals, and plants to sustain us the way all other animals do. You consume, because we do not photosynthesize like plants. We have to eat something. It's what we eat. And now, with close to 8 billion people, the choices we make really do make a difference. It was one thing 10,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, when the knowledge that we now have didn't exist. It wasn't long ago we didn't even know what viruses were. We look at the history of smallpox for thousands of years, plagued humankind. We didn't know what was causing it or what to do about it. Essentially, smallpox has been eradicated, because once we figured out what was wrong, it took a while, took a long while, but we managed to guard ourselves against that one plague. But we haven't learned the lesson of respect for nature. And one of the problems, and it isn't just wildlife, it's how we treat other animals, if you will, as well as other humans. But let's start with the animals. When you look at factory farms of chicken, cows and pigs. They're hotbeds for disease. And we know that most of our diseases have come either from other humans or from other animals. And when you mistreat animals, when you crowd them, when you have unhappiness, poverty is a way you might look at from their standpoint. I mean, cows all crowded together, fed things that are not natural for cows to eat, that make them sick. It's logical that they would get diseased. And it's a short trip from a cow to a human relative to some of the other avenues of transport. Or chickens, we're fellow vertebrates. We crowd the chickens, we feed them things they would not normally eat. And so we have, just in the last century, the last 50 years, we see an increasing number of problems. And the source goes back to pain and misery for the animals that we associate ourselves with. So it's not just the wild, so-called wet markets. It's across the board, how we treat other animals. We know better, we do. But now we've got a 2x4 saying, wake up, you can do something about this. And do we have the will to do something about it, armed with knowledge? I look at some of my family cookbooks. There are recipes for how do you cook like sparrows, songbirds. Going back early in the 20th century, it was a common thing. Muskrats from the marshes. I have an uncle who made a living shooting wild birds by the truckload, shooting and killing, trapping little animals from the marshes that were sold to the markets. That was a form of wildlife marketing. We don't do that in this country much anymore. People still take wildlife. There's still duck hunters and trappers taking wildlife for food, but it's not on the commercial scale that brought a number of species to extinction. We changed our ways partly because passenger pigeons were gone, but also because we saw other values in the wildlife that we put on the balance sheet. You've seen the change with whales. It used to be pounds of meat, barrels of oil. That's happened in my lifetime. I've seen the change. I've been a part of the change. And now, yes, whales and other marine mammals are consumed in some places, but many cultures have changed because, armed with knowledge, you realize they'd rather have the animals alive for the values that they give us than for whatever values that you get in terms of either selling them on the market or consuming them for food, or even for medicinal purposes. The medicinal purpose is another touchy business, of course, in Asian markets. I've seen, just barrels of seahorses, the racks of the gill rakers, of manta rays, frogs, you name it, lots and lots of different things that in some cases may actually have medicinal value. Horseshoe crabs are still valued by the industry in the United States. They're taken in large numbers, the blood drained out because it's useful in testing. But chemists have found a way to simulate the ingredient in horseshoe crab blood that does the job without killing the crabs. We can get over it. There's an alternative. Can we find out what it is about seahorses that makes them attractive as a medicinal object? I mean, can't we use the intelligence that we've got to solve this? We used to grind up willows to get salicylic acid as a painkiller. It's called aspirin. We get it now. Nobody really grinds up masses of willow trees today to get the active ingredient in aspirin. We figured it out. Maybe we're at a critical point in time early in the 21st century. It's not about pointing fingers, it's about solving problems and learning from the great wealth of information that's out there. Many of the medicinals that we use have come from traditional medicine. And some of it is myth, but some of it's reality. And we ought to be mindful of that and see what we can do to do the right thing. So right now, we're looking at massive loss of wildlife for a variety of reasons. COVID-19 is a wake-up call. Whatever it takes, we need to work together to try to use this moment to turn from whatever it is we're doing that is harmful to the ocean, is also harmful to us, and see if we can change the trajectory into a positive way. I really look forward to hearing what the rest of you have to say.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. We are privileged this morning to have with us Dr. Zhou Jifeng from China, from Beijing, and he's an authority in these topics. And Dr. Zhou Jifeng is the Secretary General of the China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundations. He's also the Executive Committee Vice President of the World Green Design Organization, the member of the World Environmental Law Commission of the World Conservation Union, and member of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. Now, Dr. Zhou, would you take us away with your introduction to these topics? I have your PowerPoint with me, and I shall share screen now. Make sure that everybody can see my screen of his presentations. Let's see.
Thank you, Michael. And good morning and good evening, everybody. And first, I would like to brief introduction of our foundation. It started 1985 from British, and yes. Yes, thank you. And yes, we originated from Duke Bedford from British, and we started the reintroduction of Paradise to China. And after 1992, China joined the CBD. We changed our name from China Milu Foundation to China Biodiversity Conservation Foundation. And then 20 years ago, we started to do green development. We changed our name again to the recent name. And I would like to talk about next, please. Next. And yes, about white markets. There is no such a term of white markets in China. There is no. And there is no reopening of white markets as well. In China, we have several related markets. First is we call seafood market, which is the Wuhan market, seafood market. And some of the seafood markets will have some wildlife sold, killed in the markets. That is the one in Wuhan. originated. And some other markets called agriculture markets. In that markets, we also have seafood. We also have, yes, and this is the Huanan, the Wuhan seafood market, which is the old starting point of the pandemic in China. But recently, 10 years ago, there is a second outbreak of the COVID-19 in Beijing, which is almost exactly the same scenario as the Wuhan market, which started in the Beijing Xinfadi agricultural product market. And now, every day we have dozens of new COVID-19 cases. All the cases in Beijing are related to this market. This is a very new facts. And after we check the markets, we realize several important facts this week. And the first fact is this COVID-19, this time, they check the DNA. It started from this March virus in Europe. It's not the virus, the COVID-19 virus is not recent virus in China. It's different from the virus in China. It's different from the virus in Europe today. It's almost similar to the virus in Europe in March of this year. So all we gathered the information this week, we realized this kind of market is a very special place to get to breathe. That this place will have the virus. The virus can stay in this place for some time and can outbreak to a large number of almost too many people get into the market. This market, we have every day, we have over hundreds, thousands of people visit. And after last week in Beijing, we checked over close to 1 million, 500,000 pupils tested. And we have over 200 cases, and which means this is exactly similar pattern compared with the Wuhan market. But this time we realize, but in this market, we do not have wildlife. Wildlife is, we find at the seafood place, at all the environments, we find over hundreds of samples tested COVID-19 active in this market, which means such kind of market is quite good, is very, is the essential of the case. So through this this week's study, some professors are saying that maybe wildlife is not the origin. That is not correct. And now the fact compared with the two markets, with the scientific result, we realized that first wildlife is the origin, but the market, no matter it's seafood market or agricultural market, will be the very special place to nurture, to bring the virus to the public. That is the recent result. Next. That is the very recent scientific result. We in Beijing, we are doing the test. Next, please. Next. So the China government have, okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Back.
Oh. Now we want to mention this, the market, yes. We are working on the wildlife market. It's not only the seafood, the so-called the wet market. Like this kind of bird market is also very popular in China. And we have done quite a few things to crack down those, shut down those bird markets. People breeding birds, not only for this kind of market is not for food, it's for fun. And together with the medicine market, all those involve the wildlife, those should be take some care. Next. And the next one is the e-market. It's also a very important market. Yes, wildlife-free e-commerce. Today, after the People's Congress of China shut down the wildlife for eating, for trading, the electronic market is the major problem. Like Alibaba, like Taobao, they are selling those wildlife through those markets. Those markets now is the major threats to wildlife business. Next. Next, please. Next. And now we have in this January, after the very beginning of this pandemic, we wrote to the state administration of China market and asked them to close down the wildlife markets and stop the wildlife business. And January 31st, they announced the regulation ban, the first ban to wildlife market. And that ban will stop after the pandemic. So in February the 4th, we criticized them. We write to National People's Congress and ask them to issue a new ban. February the 10th, and ask them to amend the wildlife protection law. And February 10th, the National People's Congress, NPC, announced that they are going to amend the wildlife protection law this year. And February 17th, we wrote to them again to ask immediate action. February 24th, a National People's Congress adopt and the decision of banning. This is the total ban of all eating. And then February 25th, we recommend again to ask them to ban endemic species in the TCM, in the traditional medicine business. And we also ask now we are working continually, we have more recommendation to the administration, to the government to stop the e-market and such a thing. Next. This is what we have done and what we have achieved. And not only the e-market, we are working very hard to protect the habitat. And this recent, we talked to the local government to stop their big projects. Some project is for planting trees, some project is for restorations, but none of them we think is appropriate. We ask them, we want to do habitat conservation. Next. And so that is some brief and are critical about the thing, for example, as pangolin as a case. Pangolin was, some scientists think is an origin, but 5 years ago already trying to save pangolin, stop the illegal trading, taking them out of, asked to upgrade last week, because part of the reason is the COVID-19 will achieve the goals of 5 years ago, and we are upgrade pangolin from class 2 to class 1. We take the government announced the acceptance of take pangolin out of the pharmacopoeia of China, and which this all combined together is what we have done and what we have achieved, because the COVID-19 is a terrible time to everybody, but through this lesson, we get public to join us, and we get the government approved, and have a significant progress in the wildlife conservation and in the wildlife markets control and the ban. Thank you. Next, yeah. That's my information, and we can continue our communication afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zhou. 谢谢. Thank you for your efforts and your initiative in helping the environment. Please stay with us for a while to hear the rest of the speakers. So now we have our host, Sheree. Would you take over, please?
Thank you. I'm honoured to introduce the rest of our impressive panel for this timely discussion. The first is Carl Safina, who is an ecologist and author whose work connects broad scientific understanding with a moral call to action. His writing has won many awards, including the MacArthur Genius Prize and the Pew and Guggenheim Fellowships. His most recent book is Becoming Wild: How Animal Cultures Raise Families, Create Beauty and Achieve Peace. He hosted the 10-part PBS series, Saving the Ocean with Carl Safina, and is founder of the non-for-profit Safina Centre. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. Our next panellist is Sharon Kwok. She's been featured in over a dozen films and is pursuing new and challenging means of expressing her art, as well as writing books to raise environmental awareness in Hong Kong and mainland China. Over the past several years, she's been playing an active role in environmental conservation, focusing especially on issues that are related to Hong Kong and China's unsustainable exploitation of wildlife. She's also an ambassador for SPCA HK, Hong Kong Cetacean Research Project, and also Bloom. Welcome, Sharon.
Hi, everyone.
Our next panellist is Peter Knights, who is the CEO of WildAid. While working across Asia, Peter created the first international program aimed at reducing demand for endangered species products. WildAid's demand reduction program uses sophisticated advertising techniques, donated airtime, and celebrity spokespeople with the message, when the buying stops, the killing can too, which I'm sure we've all seen. The organisation has been active in China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Canada, and the US. It now attracts more than $289 million of donated media space annually. That is ridiculously impressive. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thanks for being here. We also have Steve Blake, who is the Chief Representative at WildAid in China, and here he manages their programs to reduce the demand for endangered wildlife products and encouraging sustainable lifestyles through national media campaigns. He's responsible for delivering WildAid's message and content to China's immense social media and online audience. Before joining WildAid, he led the communication efforts for the Nature Conservancy in China. Now, though Beijing is a long way from Oklahoma, where he grew up, Steve feels he's equally at home in both of these wonderful places, and now we have him here. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Now we have Miao Wang, who has traversed the US and China, working on Madison Avenue with Fortune 500 companies, and then 7 years ago, she found her light in the sea. In 2018, she founded In Sharks We Trust, the first sustainable swimwear label 100% dedicated to shark and ocean conservation. Its mission is to reinvent conservation activism in a way of beauty and inspire the world with a purposeful narrative to become part of something meaningful. The unlikely shark girl has a bachelor's in design from Yale and a master's in business from UCLA Anderson. Welcome, Miao.
Hello. So great to be here.
Thank you. Now, have you got one of your tops on? One of your sustainable swimwear labels on?
Always wearing it everywhere I go. Have to do it.
That's beautiful. Now, last but not least is our moderator, the uber talented Alex Rose. Alex is the science editor for Ocean Geographic magazine and the managing editor for Ocean Geographic Explorers. She's also a professional photographer, accomplished violinist, Explorers Club fellow, and Paddy dive master. She founded a membership-based ocean conservation company, Blue Ring, at the beginning of 2017 in an effort to create a new method of ocean conservation accessible to and inclusive of everyone. Alex is also co-founder of Wave Film Fest, a Chicago-based video celebration of our world's waters that saw its inaugural event this year. She's also the secretary of Deep Hope, a non-for-profit founded by Dr. Sylvia Earle to build citizen submarines. What an absolute dynamo. I'm now going to hand it over to you, Alex, for this incredible discussion.
Thanks so much, Sheree. You give the best intros. Appreciate that. So thanks for everyone being with us today in whatever time zone you happen to be in. There is definitely a lot to talk about. So as much as I would like us to be able to spend hours and hours discussing these things, I am going to ask that when we start getting going on all of our responses, that we try to keep them short-ish. I'm just going to do a basic recommendation of maybe 3 minutes at a time, just so we can try to hear from everybody on every topic if we can. We'll definitely give it a shot. Thank you for being here to discuss this extremely timely topic. There's absolutely no doubt that humanity has a bit of a predatory association with the natural world that provides very fertile breeding ground for pandemics like the one we're currently seeing. And it appears that our broken relationship with nature has absolutely been a driving force of this and other pandemics in the past. So it's important that we talk about these things in order to hopefully avoid similar outbreaks in the future. And in order to do this, we need to answer some questions. So the first one of sort of 3 sets of questions that I'd like to try to get to with everybody is this. What role do humans play in both causing and solving our current pandemic? Can China in particular lead this initiative to end the trade in wildlife? And should wildlife trafficking penalties be a bit steeper than they are? These are just some of the questions we'd like to tackle. And if possible, I'd really like to start with Carl.
Oh, okay.
Well, just thoughts.
You know, we've already talked a bit about the cultural aspect of the discussion and how these discussions that touch on culture can get very touchy with people. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people who think that cultures should not be criticized, or that culture should not be criticized by anyone who is not in that culture. But we live in a very, very connected world, and culture is copying. That's what culture really is. So, you know, we have Eastern countries that are largely westernized in the way that they dress or do business. We have Western countries that rely almost entirely on many kinds of goods from Eastern countries. We have styles and fashions from the South that go to the North. We live in a very connected world. And so for me, I've spent a lot of my own lifetime criticizing many aspects of my own culture because we have problems. If we didn't have problems, we wouldn't be here talking about the problems we have. So I hope in that spirit, we understand that we are not trying to say, if we point out something cultural, we're not trying to say that those are bad people. We're trying to say that there are cultural practices that create problems. Now, in a way, I think that this has a lot to do with culture. In a way, I think it has nothing at all to do with culture. It just has to do with human behavior. So we've had an accelerating number of epidemics over the last, let's say, 40 years, and they have accelerated in the more recent years and recent decades. And now this one has gotten out of control and become a pandemic and is now, trying to beat it back in different places with varying levels of success. China being among the most successful countries in responding and doing something about it, my country being one of the least successful countries in responding and doing something about it. But one thing that I think is underlying all of this that is really crucial is that we do have a broken relationship with the rest of life on Earth. And as we make further and further incursions and leave other creatures less and less space to live, we incorporate many of them into our diets and into our trade, such that many animals that would not be close up against human beings are animals that we now eat that are not really traditional parts of diets before, like chimpanzees, for instance. We trade them so that different species are up against other species that they would not meet in nature. And if you look at the epidemics that I alluded to, essentially all of these have come from wild animals and domestic animals, because the way we treat our domestic animals has also changed and very much intensified. Now, in my lifetime, the human population of the world has tripled in one lifetime. That means that the way we do things is more intensified with a much bigger footprint than ever before. So we've had these epidemics. We've had AIDS that originated by people starting to eat chimpanzees and certain kinds of monkeys as they incurred deeper into their forest in ways that were not done before. We had SARS, we had Ebola, we had Marburg, MERS, swine flu. It's called swine flu for a reason. Bird flu from poultry. And these intensive ways that we grow domestic animals, keep and kill domestic animals, and these newly mixing ways that we have incorporated wildlife into our trade. Nobody ever got a contagious disease from eating a plate of mixed vegetables or tofu. These are related to animal diets. And it's important to understand that the extinction crisis that we have, the epidemics that are coming at an accelerating rate, the current pandemic, and just the way we either engage or ignore our capacity for compassion are all related. The way I see it, the current turmoil in the United States over our broken racial relations is a problem of compassion. And the problem that we have with wildlife is the same kind of problem. It's a problem of compassion. So what we do with this and where we go with this is going to be a matter of great debate. I was very, very heartened to see from the presentation about the changes that are going on very recently in China, some of which I didn't know about or I had heard about inaccurately. So I really, really appreciate that update. Very interesting. And I think that all of those changes seem very positive to me. But if we're going to avoid epidemics and if we're going to avoid pandemics, I think we have to really, and if we're going to have any other wild animals sharing this planet with us, I think we're going to have to rethink our relationship with the rest of the living world as our human population grows and intensifies. Obviously, we live on a finite planet. Obviously, this extinction crisis that we're in is related to the pandemic that we have, is related to the problems that we have simply getting along and being compassionate to other human beings. So I guess those are the main things that I wanted to just get across. If it were all up to me, I'd like to see us de-intensify our relationship with the rest of the world and go a lot lighter on other living things and other people. So thanks for letting me share these thoughts.
Thanks, Carl. That's absolutely a good place to start. I think the next person I'd like to go to is Sharon. Sharon, you always have had such an interesting background to me just because of your relationship with understanding the wildlife trade, I think in a different way than a lot of people do. So I would love to hear your thoughts on sort of traditional Chinese medicine, where it was maybe 20 years ago and where we are now.
Well, I think it's all about how human beings have relied on nature and use nature to benefit various aspects of our lives. When you look at the history of mankind, we are able to find items from before Ice Age that, mammoth bones that we've used for inscriptions, carvings. Today, we can't do that anymore, obviously. Our reliance on various species, such as elephants and pangolins, shark fin, these are wiping out these species from the planet. And we're reliant on them as well. Life will go on, we know this one way or another, but we could get to such a point where we're just wiping ourselves out first. Things will change, but we don't know where that's going to head. So to maintain biodiversity as we know it, I think we really need to curb our demands. Now, living in Hong Kong, as Dr. Zhou mentioned earlier, there really is no such thing per se as a wet market that serves wildlife. To us, living in Asia, there are various forms of markets. You can be going to something like a Safeway. You can be going to what they call a wet market, where animals would be sold live in many cases, from fish to poultry. And people would just go there every day to shop. I would go there sometimes. You go there for eggs, you go there for vegetables, fruits. So it's not an evil place per se, it's just a part of life. Now, what we need to do to tune everything so that we can live with nature, and as Carl mentioned, where our demands are weighing far too heavily on nature. We have to look at how we're going to feed our populations in the near future. If we don't change, we might not survive everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Sharon. It's always good to get other perspectives. And on to more other perspectives. Steve, I'd like to hear from you. You're centered very much around everything that's going on in China, and you're in charge of so much of the communications that go on at Wild Aid. What's being said lately?
Yeah, well, I think what's really been overshadowed in the global discussion on China as a result of this pandemic has been a lot of the misleading articles and discussions around like the wet markets reopening and this virus came from people in China just eating all kinds of crazy stuff. And the discussion really kind of ended there internationally, unfortunately. But what that has overshadowed has been an incredible amount of progress that's been happening here that I think doesn't get enough attention. Dr. Zhou mentioned some of the legislation that's been passed recently, which has been really encouraging. But I want to give a little bit of context about how significant that is. The wildlife industry in China is worth tens of billions of dollars. millions of people's livelihoods are wrapped up in some form or another in the wildlife industry, whether it's for fur, leather, wildlife is food, medicine, on and on. It's a massive industry. It's very complex, and at the same time, China has in a way overhauled this industry in a matter of months, right? Obviously, it's still progress. It's still in progress, but I think the resolve that the Chinese government has shown to address this issue has really, there's been no other country in the world like it so far. It's been really encouraging from quickly banning all consumption of wildlife as food, and then putting out a list of what actually that is, what food will be, what animals will be able to be raised as livestock and legal for food, what animals will no longer be able to do so. That impacted lots of people's livelihoods, right? I mean, and then how do you compensate those people, right? Like, these issues are incredibly complex. And then also at the same time, the amount of attention that's been given to pangolins, also like Dr. Zhou mentioned, pangolins have been getting a lot of good news lately by being uplisted to the highest level of protection, being removed from TCM. I think a lot of these things are really a result of the amount of public attention generated from the pandemic. And which is another thing that hasn't been getting much discussion, is the amount of public attention around wildlife that I've seen in China since this news broke out in January, since the pandemic broke out in January. I've never seen anything like it. You know, I've been in China for 15 years working on wildlife issues, never seen anything like the amount of public discussion and passion about protecting wildlife in the wake of this. I mean, like, the social media, just for a few weeks, other than what was happening on the ground in Wuhan, the other big thing was people calling on ending wildlife consumption. I think people were pretty outraged that this has happened again, and that we really need to move past this. The government has followed suit. It's been incredibly encouraging, and I mean, moving forward, we obviously want to keep this from happening again, right? And what I see is really important moving forward on this are three things. One, you need better policy, stronger enforcement, and better public awareness, right? And I think we're seeing all three of these happening at the same time here. Policy is, like I said, going through really, really encouraging upgrades. Enforcement is obviously being strengthened. Again, a lot of this stuff was illegal before, but maybe enforcement officers didn't really do too much about it, right? It continued to happen. That's no longer the case. It's such an important issue right now. So much attention on it. It's happening. Public awareness was already given a big boost from everything. Like I said, everybody was talking about it. And one thing that Wild Aid wants to do moving forward is to keep that discussion going, right? We're going to continue campaigns on these issues. So to keep it in the public spotlight. So that's a little bit about what's happening on the ground in China. And I think it's, like I said, it's really encouraging, and it's really difficult to make the changes happen that are happening here. And I think that China really can be a model for the rest of the world moving forward on how to address some of these issues.
Oh, that's really great to hear. I know there can oftentimes be a disparity between when something is made illegal and when trade in it actually stops, because things tend to go underground. If they're made illegal, it doesn't necessarily make them go away. I mean, I know, tiger bone, rhino horn, things like that were removed from the TCM pharmacopoeia in the 80s, but they were still in existence, so it's good to hear that things might be taken a bit more seriously on this go around. Maybe we can hear from Peter a bit about a continuation of this topic. Maybe where are we going from here as far as regulation is concerned, and what we can expect to see happen.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, I think we should not be using the term wet market. The term wet market applies to every farmer's market in the United States. What we're talking about here is live wildlife markets. And, we're together with other organizations, we're calling for a ban on live wildlife markets around the world. At endthetrade.com, anyone wants to sign that petition, that would be very good. And that is effectively what China has done very, very quickly. And, I'm not keen on the blaming game, but I do think Steve's right that China has acted very decisively now and comprehensively in dealing with this. And one of your questions was, should China lead the world in this? And I do think they should. China usually takes a multilateral position, unlike some governments in the world. All of Southeast Asia has issues with live wildlife markets. A lot of African countries have issues with live wildlife markets and with dangerous bushmeat, as Carl was mentioning, things like Ebola. There are some nastier diseases than COVID out there. And obviously, if you're eating things like primates, the jump from primates to humans is much swifter than from bats to possibly pangolins to another species. And I think Sylvia's absolutely right in saying this is a wake-up call. You know, this is a warning. This is a canary in the coal mine. Whether it's deforestation or climate change, all the things we're doing are making these risks much more serious. But if the governments of the world can't listen, when literally this is, to my mind, the biggest event that's ever happened to humanity, ever. Even world wars have not affected so many people so quickly. And I think we always were worried about disease, and we were mainly worried from human life and illness, but I don't think any of us thought the economic impact that could come from a pandemic like this. I mean, trillions and trillions of dollars have been lost. People are in abject poverty in places around the world brought on by this. This is massive. And if governments can't realize now that we're not just talking about cute and cuddly animals or preserving things for their own sake, this is about preserving economies, it's about preserving lives, and we have to take it way, way more seriously than we have. So as Steve said, it's a question of we need new laws in some countries. We need stiffer penalties in some countries. We need stricter enforcement, and we need a change of mind, a change of hearts and minds to reduce the demand and to also see this as not just a conservationist issue. We did a poster a while ago saying wildlife trafficking impacts everyone. And we didn't actually realize quite how true it would be, but I think now pretty much everyone on the planet is being impacted, most likely from a wildlife trafficking problem. And of course, we don't know yet whether this is definitely connected to the pangolins, but if it wasn't, it absolutely could have been, and the next time it could be. So to my mind, that's not the important thing. The important thing is we've clearly identified live wildlife trade as a source of new disease, a very significant risk source of new disease. And now we need to do something about it. And my hope is that I think China has taken the right actions. I think there's a blueprint there for other countries to follow. I hope China will lead internationally in meetings internationally to move on this. I hope they'll provide technical support to some of the countries in Africa, for example, that may have the willpower. Malawi recently banned all bushmeat, for example. They probably need help technically enforcing that. Can China be a leader in that? I hope so. We've always viewed China as a potential leader on climate change and many, many other issues. There's a dearth of leadership from other parts of the world right now. So I think it's our hope that we can see in China a model response to this. It has been very effectively enforced to date, and there's an appointment of a state council, a member, to oversee the enforcement, which is very significant. It means it's being overseen by a very high level. That sends an important message to every official in China. So this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to change the dynamic. It's an opportunity, I think, the world's on pause right now. We need to obviously reassess our whole approach to wildlife trade and consumption of wildlife and bushmeat and animals that can or can't be eaten. But we also need to look at deforestation, climate change, and everything else that's going on, because these crises could have been caused by any of those factors too. And if this isn't a clear enough warning sign for the world that our approach to date has not been the right way, I don't know what is, because the costs, as I say, are trillions and trillions of dollars. And so I hope this is the wake-up call we need.
Yeah, thanks for that, Peter. That's sort of the perfect segue, I think, into our next set of questions, which is more talking about how we can individually and collectively decrease habitat loss and all the other issues that we cause by encroaching on the wild systems around us in order to reduce the odds that we run into further pandemics in the future. These outbreaks are a very obvious manifestation of a very dangerously unbalanced relationship that we have with nature, and show us, or I at least hope show us, that our own destructive behavior towards nature is ultimately endangering our own health, so that this will hopefully wake everybody up to the stark reality of what we've been doing for far too long. So yeah, let's get into this idea of what we can both individually and collectively do by way of habitat fragmentation and doing things within our own personal lives, and hopefully inspiring corporate entities to do the same, to take action to not destroy our natural habitats that allow a buffer between wildlife and us. So let's come back around, I guess. I'll try to make sure we hit everybody again. Carl, would we maybe like to talk again about what we can do in our lives to essentially make sure that we're not contributing to massive amounts of habitat loss that will put us directly in the path of wildlife that we might not be best off doing?
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. One is I don't like thinking about wildlife as something that we need to avoid. I like thinking about wildlife as something that makes our lives beautiful if it's abundant and we leave room for it, and it's part of how we live. This is the way it's been for human beings since human beings first arose on the planet. They lived in a world that was full of animals and full of beauty. So that's one thing. And so my orientation to that question about habitat loss and destruction is, well, it's twofold, I guess. First of all, you know, the ever expanding numbers of human beings is an issue. And I am constantly amazed that there are people who think that it's somehow not a problem, or that it's not a problem because we can feed everybody. But the fact that we can feed 8 or 10 or 12 or 15 billion people is actually the problem, because all of those people want a lot of things. They want the stuff that has to come out of the ground that makes metal and electronics. They're going to need water. They're going to want wood. They're going to need space. They're going to come up against other people. So I think what we need is, instead of seeing nature as something that's been in our way, or now sort of casting aspersions and saying that to protect ourselves, we have to wall nature off from ourselves so that we don't come in any contact with any animals. What I think we need to understand is that we have to leave room for the rest of what lives on the planet. Everything that's here has as much claim to being here as our species does. Our species has acquired this incredible power, and we've often seen the rest of the living world as being in the way. That's a Western way of seeing it mostly. It's not. Most of the history of humanity, people living in tribal groups and traditional cultures, they had great reverence for the rest of the living world. They understood that they relied very directly on it, and they also feared that if they disrespected it, it would withhold the things that they need for survival. We have a very disrespectful relationship, and I think that simply having a respectful relationship and saying that we need to leave room, we need to stop seeing nature as either in our way or having no value unless we can somehow put it into this macerator that our collective human global culture has become, where we just use everything around us until it's not there anymore. That's a very destructive path, and it's a self-destructive path. If you think of what it takes for human beings to survive, you know, just all the work it takes to make a living and have food and shelter, why is that even worth doing? It's worth doing because there's a lot of beauty in the world. And as we erase the beauty, life becomes less worth living. It becomes more of just a grind to stay alive. I think in many ways, beauty is what makes life worth the time and effort that it takes. And to reorient and say we must safeguard the rest of the living world. We are the stewards and the keepers of it. We are in control because of this tremendous power that we've acquired. And that if we continue to just roll over it, we will have nothing left. We will look at a very, very grim, bleak planet. And in addition to just the terrible morality involved in driving other living things that have been on Earth for tens of millions of years off the face of the planet, we are simplifying and making more unappealing and uglier and more intense the human world in which we live.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Completely agree, of course, though, about the beauty being worth it. And I think that will be a good segue to Miao. Miao, a lot of what you do kind of centers around shifting your lifestyle from Fortune 500 corporate to what you do now, which is shark conservation, all in. So maybe tell us about that, because I know beauty plays a large part in what you do and why you do it. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, now
Thank you for muting yourself, though.
But I can't agree with Dr. Safina was talking about earlier. I think a lot of it has to do with our relationship to nature. But I think like on the other hand, for humans as the top predator in the animal world, like technically speaking, there's nothing wrong with us eating meat. It's just really a matter of the amount and how we live our life now. So when we're talking about like the cause of the pandemic, it started with the pathogen. And when we're talking about like where the pathogen came from, it's not just single-handedly blaming on wet market, because it's so much bigger than that. Climate change has increased the irregular weather pattern that increased the mutation of pathogens. And I think a huge part of it has to do with industrialized food production. It's not what we eat, but how we eat. When we actually just recently went to the wet market, the biggest seafood market in Shanghai, to do a photo shoot, really juxtaposing beauty and the stuff that we are not used to seeing, to really make people think, and like all the things that we don't see, just how much food is going through the market on a single day. It's mind-blowing. So I think like when we're talking about industrial food production, that comes with raising livestock in super crowded spaces, and they have to grow super fast, so they're on so much antibiotics. And when they're on so much antibiotics, they're immune to pathogens in a way, so it's more likely for these livestock to carry pathogen and then eventually get them to us. So I think it's so much bigger than just talking about wet market. And I love the fact that even this session is not wildlife versus wet market, but wildlife and wet market. So I think like if we can use the wet market as an kind of an entry point for us to talk about more bigger problems, I think it's so much more meaningful than just blaming it on one thing. And I think like for what we've been trying to do as very small individuals and small groups of people, I think it's really to supplement all of the legislation work and all the NGO work that are happening around us. I think like creating that type of top-down change is super important, because we have to get the government on board. We have to have all the science to back us up also. But I think without really getting to the grassroots and the community for people to understand, we don't need as much as we are consuming now. Because industrialized food production and industrialized everything actually has to do with overconsumption. And a lot of times when we're talking about overconsumption, which is happening a lot in China now, is because people have this void in their lives, their lack of purpose. They feel like consuming more and eating more seafood, eating more meat makes them happy. So like what I'm trying to do is to go out there and tell the communities and young people that this is not what makes you happy. It's really finding a purpose in life and really understanding your connection to nature and the humility that you feel when you're immersing yourself in a much bigger world than yourself. Those things will bring you happiness. It's not about eating meat every single meal or buying the 200 kwai Chanel lipstick. So yeah, like I think like a lot of the stuff is really more focusing on the philosophical side of things that I'm trying to do. Like admittedly, preaching about philosophy and the purpose of life is not as scalable as legislation change or science, but I think it's what's needed also. And swimwear is really just my platform to tell these stories and really kind of make people to turn around and pay attention. You are on mute.
Yes, now I'm on mute. I didn't want to. Perfect. Problems. Thank you for that, Miao. It's great to hear all the different ways that everyone can make a difference. And so much of this comes down to the way we communicate things. And for you, it's, you know, through this beauty of a swimwear line that you can grab onto people and tell them about this new world that they may not have seen before. And in the case of Wild Aid, it's linking up with celebrities and people who really have a platform to talk to other people who have a similar mindset to kind of change their way of thinking. So Steve, can you maybe tell us a bit about maybe some of the campaigns that you have been part of and how you decide what to say and how to connect with people? How do you create these campaigns?
Right. We've been doing these campaigns in China for close to 20 years now. And Wild Aid also does these campaigns around the world. In China, at least, we work with celebrities and we work with media and government all at once to create campaigns that really, you know, at their core level, not only try to educate, but inspire the public to care about, specific wildlife species, generate attention, and understanding about how our actions can impact wildlife that might be very far away from you. And we do this on a huge scale here in China because we have so much media support and government support and celebrity support here in China that these messages really reach hundreds of millions of people with each campaign around the country. And one thing that's really interesting with some of these campaigns is that a lot of these issues, they weren't really much in the public discourse before these campaigns. What these campaigns do is really make an issue such as pangolins or shark fin maybe 15 years ago. 15 years ago when shark fin consumption was starting to spike, there really wasn't much discussion about it, right? And then when you have people like Yao Ming and Jackie Chan on national TV talking about shark fin, that instantly puts it on the public spotlight, right? And things like Ivory have had that happen as well. Most recently, I think penguins is a really good example. Before 2015, 2016, it really wasn't much of an issue. And the more you have major celebrities like Angelababy, who we work with here, Jackie Chan, Jay Chou, some of the biggest names in the region here, really, these people are idols to a lot of people, and they see them on billboards. Rather than selling a product, they're selling a message about caring for wildlife, and it's something different that people tend to remember, and it generates more and more discussion, and that discussion generates eventually, in some ways, policy change, and over time a reduction in the demand for these products. And so, we do tend to focus on specific species and a specific message on an action that you can do most simply by not buying products from these species, such as elephants, rhinos, tigers, sea turtles, sharks, pangolins, and that really, we hope, will over time lead to an even greater compassion towards the natural world, not just that one particular species.
Yeah, absolutely. Sharon, I'm going to go to you next, and I'm hoping you can tell us a bit more about your organization, Aqua Meridian, because you were just talking about a lot of these charismatic megafauna. We've got our elephants and these adorable pangolins that everyone's now been introduced to in the world, thankfully, and their plight. And then it'll kind of bring us into our underwater world soon too with sharks. Sharon, I know your sharkophant is our combo animal that I get to see you with all the time. So maybe tell everybody about that.
Sharkophant shirt.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
So, well, in Hong Kong, yeah, we started with creating this mascot, Sharkophant. Okay, so it represents a sustainable future for Hong Kong, where we've woken up and we no longer demand ivory and shark fin, because we used to be the global hub for both of these things. But what other things that we were able to do in Hong Kong, raising awareness, we do a lot of beach cleanups. We also work with the government. So recently, working also with Dr. Sylvia Earle, we've created this marine protected area in Hong Kong, and it's now the first hope spot in Asia. What we need to do there, though, is it's an area where turtles have been coming up to lay their eggs for centuries, but we haven't had any turtle sightings for, about 3 years now, not laying eggs anyways. Now, a lot of this has to do with, for example, boat traffic. A lot of these turtles are being hit as they're at the surface, hit by jet skis, yachts, pleasure crafts, and other fishing boats. So in creating this area, we're trying to limit the number of people that show up there, and consequently preserve these species so they could at least get to shore and lay their eggs. Policing has always been a problem, because Hong Kong has always been a fishing port, but our fishery collapsed and we stopped per senior trawling in 2013. So we're seeing a rebound in our fisheries. And even though we maintain a control in Hong Kong waters of our local fleets, we have fleets coming from other places that often we're unable to control because we don't have enough policing to enforce the issue. So I think ultimately it boils down to education. We're all playing a role in this. Personally, I really appreciate, for example, the work that Carl does. I've read a number of his books. So trying to inspire people and wake people up to the beauty of nature is very, very important. In a city like Hong Kong, we're very unique here. We do have a lot of wildlife, but in fact, Hong Kong used to even have tigers and rhinos. But of course, we don't have those anymore. So we're located in an area where there's a lot of forestation, and we have a lot of local species that are quite rare. We tend to take it for granted, city folks. You know, we live in our buildings and we don't go out and appreciate it as much as we should. In so doing, we don't value it as much. So inspiring the public to a greater love for nature, falling in love with nature, I think is very, very important. Ultimately, of course, we need to face the issues of how to sustain our global population in the future. Now, eating meat, like Mao says, it's not a sin. It's not something that we shouldn't be doing, perhaps. But perhaps we should reconsider when the population gets to that size, and if we do all rely on meat, we won't be able to manage the farming, even if we don't rely on wildlife anymore. So we have to sit back, governments need to sit back and collectively look at how to tackle this whole situation. But all of us, we need to get out there and inspire and educate. I think that's really the key at this time.
Absolutely. Yeah, education is definitely what we need a whole lot more of lately. I actually think maybe Dr. Zhou can talk to us a little bit about that. I know you do quite a bit of work with educating the younger generations about these topics. So could you tell us about that?
Yes, we started from the textbook. You know, in China, one textbook used by over hundreds of millions of students. But in that textbook, it says pangolins are good for traditional medicine, pangolins are good for food, all those stuffs. Billions of students use that, grown-ups with that textbook. We go to the authority, ask them to change the textbook. They did. And through the similar things, we have done quite a few. And I talked to the Ministry of Education and asked them to holistic change and check all the textbook and with traditional knowledge. And that's one thing we have done quite a few in the recent year. The second is we work together with the college students organizations, with thousands of them, over 1,000 universities. We work with them to do the campus, to do campaigns, to recruit sophomore freshmen and to educate. That's the second part. The third part, we set up many center for elementary and middle school students for education. And we have a phrase called HBS, human-based solution. And because all the problems are from human, so everybody's action will make a big difference. And that we taught them, your choice of service, your choice of products, your choice of way of living will make the fundamental change. And your choice, your idea will also influence the policy as well. And recently we feel not the tradition, not the culture, not the government, although we sued the government every day, literally. But our number one enemy is the company. And a few people compared with the human beings, few people with those illegal business, those companies are fighting back. They are trying to make, in 2016, we made our China wildlife protection law. We have very comprehensive proposals, but only few of them are accepted. We criticize that law is wildlife utilization law, but eventually during 2016, we failed many proposals. The reason? Because of the business. They are the leaders in our China Wildlife Protection Association. Steve knows that. And they work in the same building with the administration. They are much stronger than the lobby company. They do participate in the lawmaking and amending things. But this time, we compete with the people, especially with the support like Steve's team, and as well as other international team. They do great campaigns in China. Now people stand up, they express their idea. Within 3 days, we collect over 1 million signatures to ask the NPC, National People's Congress, to change the law. And those kind of people's participation, we think, is the key for COP15 of CBD. We ask them to put people's participation as the key for the biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I like the human-based solutions option. That seems like a good way to go. So we're kind of, I guess, at a point where we need to get to our last question, which is more focused on our ocean environment. So this next topic is sort of about how we can talk to people about seeing seafood more as sea life, kind of changing this concept that what's in the ocean is only to be eaten and to be exploited however we see fit. And that really does need to change, because the equivalent is kind of insane. Well, gosh, it's getting old now. Charles Clover's book, The End of the Line, I think it was released in 2009. So it's probably even changed since then. But he was comparing, talking about our Eastern Atlantic bluefin tuna stocks. And he sort of likened the Eastern bluefin stock to be the equivalent of a giant panda as far as how endangered it is. And the Western Atlantic bluefin stock is about the same as a black rhino. So, and when you think about them in terms like that, you would never see someone saying that, hey, we should go eat rhinos or we should go eat pandas, because there are plenty of them out there. Like, that's not really a thing that we would ever say at this point, but we do say it about tuna. And since Sylvia's got the tuna behind her, I think maybe I will have her start this little section of this last bit of the conversation off, which is how we can reimagine seafood as sea life.
Babies do not start out with food preferences. They learn them. We teach them. I mean, throughout these discussions, there's a constant theme of knowing. Call it marketing, if you will, call it education, if you will, but we learn, and we do have the capacity to change. As Carl pointed out, we have become international. We become a global society. And of course, we have individuality, and that's to be treasured. But when we say that the thought of giving up something like tuna is, we learned to eat tuna. We didn't, as babies, start out that way. We acquired a taste for it, or it was marketed to us as something that it's what we do. And because it's artificially available globally, because of conduits of trade that have developed in my lifetime, It didn't exist when I was a child. People think it's common, even though if you distributed all the bluefins in the world equally, the individual amount that 8 billion of us could have would be really tiny. And maybe have it once and then it would be over. I think the attitude that we have is where the attitude, the whole business of empathy, something that religions around the world kind of universally convey, no matter what else they convey. It's do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Get into the other creature, other humans' perspective, and look at the world through their eyes as a way of motivating your behavior. Behave as you would like others to treat you. Well, the way we treat fish would certainly, and if you really think about it, what we do to wild animals in the sea, we learn that it's okay. We learn hate, we learn to inflict pain on others as if it's okay, whether it's other humans or other animals. So somehow, I do not have the answer. I wish I did. Whether it's music or art, marketing, education, science, we have to think of ourselves as a part of the natural world that keeps us alive, and we'd better respect what keeps us alive, because the way we're heading now, with a lack of respect, the lack of empathy, does not bode well for our future. And it's not just the way we treat wild animals, it's how we treat other human beings, but it's all kind of the same. It's how we regard other forms of life and other humans included. It's a key to getting from where we are to get to a better place. And that goes right down to eating animals. That's a learned behavior too. We can get by perfectly well without eating animals. We can, but we choose not to. Okay, so we choose to eat animals. Can't we do better than what we're now doing? Do we have to have animals at every meal? That's a learned behavior. And it's marketed to us as a desirable thing to do. But maybe we can shift the marketing, call it education, call it common sense, call it science, call it better health, call it what you will. We have the tools, we just have to get to that place, whatever it's going to take. Otherwise, this is going to continue. We're at that point, and it really is. I think this COVID-19 pandemic has got people thinking in ways that they haven't thought before. Let's not lose this chance on many fronts. Climate doesn't respect walls or policies or anything else either. The pandemic is just one thing that now we have to face together. And let's take what we now know that we could not know before and put it to work. I really admire and appreciate the ideas, the thoughts, the wisdom that is coming out of this discussion. And I hope we'll build on that and not let it just stop with this meeting.
Absolutely. That's it has been so great already to hear from everyone, and just to hear what everyone's saying and thinking and feeling, and it makes you feel like you can keep everybody galvanized towards something a little bit better from here on out. Yeah, you're absolutely right, in that we sort of need to realize that there are limitations to how we treat non-human animals, and how we've been treating them as these commoditized beings. And it's sort of this strange expression of our belief in human exceptionalism, and fish have sort of been relegated to these objects that get extracted based on market control and wealth accumulation, and we forget to value them appropriately because they seem free, but they're absolutely not. So of course there are a lot of different ways to look at sea life. They don't just have to be wildlife. There are plenty of people in the world that do depend on seafood as a source of protein. But so much of it comes down to, like Miao said earlier, it's not always if we make a choice, but it's what choice specifically that we make. And especially in terms of sea life, if we are going to consume them, we have to be making better choices. Bluefin tuna, for example, should just be straight up off the menu. Carl, I know you're very well versed on sustainability and what constitutes sustainable seafood. Perhaps you can expand on that a bit.
Well, the reason I became an ocean lover was because I started as a little boy being a fishing person. I was introduced to fishing by my parents and my uncles. I still enjoy fishing. I still eat fish. But I've often said it's okay to use what's in the ocean. It's not okay to use it up. And the most important word in any language, I think, is enough. And many people don't know the meaning of that word, enough. So, you know, we do treat, you said we treat them like they're commodified beings, but we mostly treat fish not as beings at all. We mostly just treat them as commodities. They're not much different than chairs or shoes in most people's minds. And one of the biggest problems is this almost total separation between many people and the food that they have and how that food exists as a living thing. It's worst with fish because you don't see fish swimming by during the course of the day. You know, maybe you'll see birds swimming by, or in some places you might have a bird feeder outside your window. You cannot put a bluefin tuna feeder outside your window. Somebody mentioned the phrase giving up eating tuna or you know, giving up fish. Well, when I was young, bluefin tuna were very common. They were abundant. We saw them all the time. I knew them as wild animals. That's how I first knew them. I didn't know them as a red piece of meat on a plate where you can't imagine what their lives are like or how they live in the ocean. I first knew them as beings that lived in the ocean. Astonishing fish, incredibly powerful things, unbelievably beautiful. And we did catch some and we did eat some. It would be nice for me if we could keep doing that, but we can't because they're just not there anymore in anything like the numbers they were. It went from being a thrilling thing for me to being something that is just incredibly sad. To go to these places where it was very common to run into them and see them at the surface or catch them and see nothing but water at the surface because they're not there anymore. When I first started fishing for sharks, we would know where in the ocean to stop and start fishing because we would see shark fins at the surface. And it was almost entirely a catch and release thing for us for a lot of years when we were young, but the sharks were there. They were a big part of what life was like around us. And now you go out and you don't see sharks anymore because they're not there anymore. So if you fish for them, it's not exciting, it's just sad now. You know, that's because we didn't just use what was in the ocean respectfully. We used it disrespectfully, and to a large extent, we used it up. And that is a great loss. That to me is what it means to give up tuna and to give up sharks. Is not because people stopped using it, it's because they wouldn't stop using them until there were so few left that the whole ocean feels different because we've really changed it. And in the course of my adult life, we really changed it. So I think that that's, you know, really the bottom line for me is if we respected what was there, we could keep using it, but we disrespect it. And that's why for many places and many kinds of fish, as I think Sharon said, that the fishing had collapsed. in Hong Kong, we're not supposed to have the world collapsing around us. That happens because we are doing things wrong. And when we do back off, we have seen in the United States, we do have pretty good fisheries management now. Australia has pretty good fisheries management. New Zealand, Falkland Islands, very few other places do. But where you back off, you can see fish populations start to recover if there are enough left that they can start to recover. And then you can rethink what the relationship with them should be and what the meaning of enough should be. So thanks for letting me comment on that.
Oh, for sure, wouldn't have missed it. That's actually, it reminds me of a story that I talked to Sharon about last time we chatted. And it was, you were telling me about tuna and how when you told people that we were running out of tuna, their reaction was, oh dear, we need to go get all the rest of them before they're gone. And that was just such a crazy concept to me, but that seems like, you know, scarcity definitely drives up price and oftentimes desirability. Yeah, I would love you to go maybe tell a bit more about that experience that you had and your take on it.
Yeah, that was that was
Crazy.
not one of my happiest moments for sure.
No.
I was in Kaohsiung in Taiwan. I go there pretty often, and I do my little bit of research at the fisheries there. They do have a huge, huge fishing market, and it starts a little before midnight, where they start selling small stuff like clams and smaller fish. Aquaculture there is done very well, I mean, on a very large scale. But it ends around about 8 in the morning, and usually the finale would be the rarer things. And the one time I was there, I'll recall there were about 8 bluefins being hauled up with cranes from boats. And well, you know, you and I, people like us, we would look at this and we would be astounded at what's still going on. So then I had to have lunch with some friends there, right next to the market. And of course, they were ready to dine on tuna. And we started talking about this. They explained that it was a Tuna Festival, which happened every year. And you know, when this goes on, we eat our fill of tuna and enjoy it. And it's very cheap and it's very good and so on and so forth. I pulled out my iPad and we went into why we shouldn't be doing this. So I showed them numbers, I showed them statistics and how tuna populations are disappearing. And the mind boggles, but the reaction I got, rather than, oh, let's rethink how we eat, let's try to do something different, it was, oh, well, they're disappearing. Oh no, come on everyone, let's eat all we can while it's still there, because we won't be able to get any more maybe next year or the year after. So that's the kind of thinking that I find the hardest to deal with. Usually it's the older generation that thinks like that. The younger generation, more or less, you know, try to do the right thing. They want to aim for a sustainable future, but it's as if some of these older people, they just think it's okay for species to be wiped out. It happens all the time. We'll just move on to the next and the next and the next. And this is what I get when I research Hong Kong's dry seafood market as well. There's this one guy that I know, he's 80 years old now. He swum to Hong Kong from mainland China when he was a teenager. And because he's not very well educated, you know, in writing anyways, for schooling, so he spent his whole life trading in seafood, as in literally hauling in fish in nets and drying them and the trade itself. So yeah, I've spent hours and hours with this guy, just trying to get information and insight from him, because what he's seen, I would never be able to see. Hong Kong used to have humphead wrasse, for example, everywhere. I haven't seen any diving in Hong Kong at all, personally. So we've wiped them out from local waters, I think, but I've heard of reported sightings recently, so we don't know. Anyways, it's just the prevailing sort of thinking that we must eradicate, that it's okay to wipe out something, but it's not. Everything's tied in, and even if it's not, what right do we have to wipe something out for future generations? think about the beauty of it, if not how important they may be to us.
Absolutely. Yeah, no one should have the right to be doing that. Absolutely. I'd like to ask Peter, I think, I have not looked into it in depth enough, and I should have, as far as Wild Aid's campaigns that they may or may not be doing in terms of seafood and sea life. I didn't look into this, and I would like to know more about that from you.
Sure, I'd just like to make a general point if I could first. I think,
please.
We really need to inspire more people and love of the ocean and, treating marine wildlife as wildlife. But I think we also can't shy away from speaking people's own language, which is, frankly, mostly economics. So when we talk to policymakers, we talk to fishermen, we've got to knock this jobs versus environment thing on the head. Without an environment, there are no jobs. Without fish, there are no fishermen. So we don't need to. Yes, it's nice if we can persuade people to our point of view of the love of nature, and we can do that. But there are hard economic arguments out there to show what we're doing is completely unsustainable and therefore is a negative economic impact. And if you can't show that after COVID, which will literally have cost trillions and trillions of dollars, probably because of environmental abuse at the bottom of it, then we'll never have a moment like that again to be able to illustrate this isn't a touchy-feely thing. It's not just about love of nature. This is hard-nosed economics. It's people's hardship, it's people's jobs, and it's people's health. And I think we've got to change the dialogue about what, where we're coming from on this. We're not here to be a bunch of greenies that are against everything and things like that. We are for the creation of jobs and the ongoing jobs. Sustainable activities are usually a lot more labor intensive than non-sustainable activities. And I think we can't shy away from that. And that is people's language, that's the policymakers' language. We've got to keep hammering that home until it gets through. So on the campaigns, we're obviously still working on sharks and shark fin. We're doing a lot of work now in Thailand and then also on sea turtles and use of sea turtle products in China. We've just done a 3-part documentary which went on in Youku, was very, very popular. I mean, one of the good things about COVID is people have been watching streaming shows a lot more. So streaming has been really good for education. So really getting down on the consumption of sea turtle shells and things. And I think also working with the government on enforcement, because to us, the enforcement and the education go hand in hand. If the thing has a profile, people are more likely to enforce it. And it's a virtuous circle you can create there. So we've been doing a lot of work on that. We're working towards ultimately some more sustainable seafood mentality in China. I think it's early days. The concept isn't there quite yet. As Sharon was illustrating, the idea is, well, if it's short, let's get more of it. I think that is very much an older generation attitude. And I think we've got to focus on the youth here and the next generation. But we can't forget the policymakers of today. And I think, it's going to take too long to persuade them to be animal lovers. But we can, I think, give them very hard economic arguments as to why these things shouldn't go on in unsustainable ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for saying that. And now that you've mentioned both youth and policymakers, that'll be our last 2 people. So, Miao, everything you do. Oh, yeah, yep.
Just jump in.
Yeah, please.
I totally agree with that, Peter. But first, we have to account for fish and account for nature properly. Fish have an accounting base of 0 when they're alive in the ocean. It's only dead fish that have a value by today's accounting methods. So to really be able to win on the economic argument, we've got to get the economics straight. We have to get the value straight.
And you could say the same about forestry. You could say the same about elephants in the field. It is about taking a different view of accounting. And we should be factoring in any money made on illegal wildlife trade has been wiped out by COVID over the last 50 years. It's been wiped out and more. And that's how we should look at our accounting, is that there are costs that are hidden. There are costs that come down the line. And in the ocean, these things are there, they have value, and that's our bank. And if we rob the bank, there's nothing left for anyone else.
Yep. Nail on the head there.
I'll just say one more thing. I think the only person who probably does have a bluefin tuna feeder outside their window is probably Sylvia.
Well, if anyone does, it's definitely Sylvia. And apparently I need to come bird watching. Good stuff. All right. Thanks for that back and forth. That was good. Miao, so everything you do is about shark conservation. Tell us more about that. What's your take on where we're headed as far as the viewpoint on sharks?
First of all, I think the fact that I was born in China, grew up in the US, but now I'm back in China, I'm seeing everything that's happening in China. There's so much over consumption. It's all based around buy culture. The population is still huge. But I think I do see hope at the same time, because there are a big group of young people that are curious. And I've spoken at schools and talked to kids from 9 to 11 that are asking the right questions. So I think we should have hope in the fact that we can do something to affect change. So I think that is one thing that's super important. And for me, I think just giving the science and the economics to people, it is just one part of everything that we're doing, because everything cannot be done in isolation. We have to do everything all together for people to have all the information for them to make the decision themselves. I think like the most important thing is for people to be informed with all the information that they can have, and be inspired by beauty and the nature, for them to actually start to change things little by little. And I think like the common thing that people feel, I think especially in China, is everyone is very, very short-sighted. You want to see something that create change or make a difference right away. And the other thing is, because there's so many population, there's a very easy diffusion of responsibility. You feel like, okay, someone else is doing something. The policy will be made. This will be better, become better. For me as an individual, there's not that much that I can do to really create a difference. I think a lot of the stuff that I'm doing here with shark conservation, as an individual, as one single organization, my single biggest hero is Rob Stewart. He is one person. He created the films that created all this change, that inspired a generation to actually create something to make a difference. And he inspired me, and I've been around to really inspire more people, to give power in their hand to really make a difference, to give them the information on sharks, but also to change the perception of sharks, but also for them to just live a little bit differently. So yeah, I think it's never just about sharks for me. I think it's an entry point for me to fall in love with the ocean and the rest of the world. And I think like I'm out there to talk about sharks for people to find their sharks that inspire them to live a little bit differently. So that's me and the shark stuff. But also like when it comes to the question over here, talking about the classification of seafood and wildlife, I totally agree with the other panelists. Like nowadays, kids or young people, everyone, we live nowadays in such a sterile world. Like everything that we see is on our plate is in the supermarket. We completely lose the connection between how we live and what we eat with what's going on in the ocean and the rest of the world. So for people to be able to see that, whether it's through Blue Planet and documentaries like this, or just inspire people to go experience and travel and really see the world that's meaningful, I think like that's another thing that needs to be done. And also there's so much loopholes, so we that there are, like, no matter what level of legislation we have, when we're talking about like, okay, we're gonna ban all wildlife trade, now some of the places that I've been to, they still sell farmed sharks. And then it sounds like as long as we put farmed to it, is no longer wildlife and is appropriate. Yesterday, I just saw a video of this farm in South Africa, the farm lions to use their bones and sell their skins. Wow. And on their farm, like in South Africa, there are 12,000 farmed lions that are used for all kinds of commercial purposes. And there are only 3,000 wild lions out there. So I think it's the same here. Like the fact that you can farm something doesn't make you right. No. And I have friends, I literally have coworkers who would eat sharks twice a year, and they think it's completely normal because it's farmed. So I think like how we can define these things, not just scientifically, but also in people's head, is very, very important. And that will definitely take some time to happen.
That will definitely take some time. And, you know, it's on the education front and the legislation front. which is why I think I'm going to end with Dr. Zhou, because you're going to tell us about your efforts to make sure that certain types of bluefin tuna are not being sold anymore.
Yes, in 2017, the number one leading online market, JD, starting promoting southern bluefin tuna, and which is listed endangered in IUCN's list, red list, and we lead a group of grassroots NGO make a big campaign to ask them to stop it. In June 11th, we openly write a letter to criticize, although by law, there is no regulation to control this. It's not illegal in China to sell bluefin tuna, to sell endangered species of seafood. But because of the campaign, the second day, June the 12th, and JD openly announced that they remove bluefin tuna from the list. They stopped to selling it, which is very significant. And we make that day bluefin tuna day, June the 12th. And starting that day, we check the internet every day, and whoever sell the bluefin tuna through internet, we will stop them. And it's a great success, very encouraging to the conservation organizations. And so that through this, we similar ways we worked towards the seafood, ocean life, marine life conservation. Thank you.
We are probably more than out of time. So this was probably, although we could talk all night about this, or morning in some people's cases, I think that would probably be an all right place to stop. Thank you everyone so much for bringing your perspectives and your experiences to this discussion. There's so much that's been said and so much more to be said. And I hope that we can all remain in contact and remain motivated during these strange times to make sure that our progress, although it may be small, is always forward. And I'm going to turn it over to Michael to close us out.
Wow. I'm not mute, am I? Okay. This is so powerful. This session is very powerful. Thank you everyone on the panel. Yes, the pandemic is a wake-up call. The question I ask is, are we going to waste it? Are we going, or everybody's pushing us, pushing back to go back to normal? Or are we going to pivot and adapt and for the better of ourselves, for the environment? I think from this session, and the last two forum sessions, I talk about what can each one of us do, the more the we can do for the environment, for our planet. And it boils down to a few keywords like love, compassion, empathy for nature. We need to get back connected with nature. We need to empower children, they are the future. We need to empower them with knowledge and with the right narrative to take us beyond where we are now. And I think, beside the government, beside the corporates have a big role to play to spread the message, because they have the capacity to reach out to the employees, to the companies, to the public. And every company, every corporate should have a blue statement. And everybody think blue in the sense that if you think blue, you think about the environment, you include the environment in your corporate missions. And that's where we should start. And then the family, of course, and the way we preach about to our kids is something that we make sure that we include nature in the narrative. So what we did here for World Ocean Day, we especially reaching out to China and the rest of the world. I did a song for the oceans. It's in Chinese, and I've shared it last week, and I'll put it public after this session. Is to get people to think and be better connected with the oceans. So once again, thank you everyone for sharing your wisdom, your perspective, and experience. And we like to stay connected, and we hope to have a session sometime in the near future in China or elsewhere in Hong Kong, Australia. We have each one of you together and share same mind, our thoughts, and how we can take this further and continue this conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Earle, Dr. Chow, Carl, Miao, Steve, Peter. Thank you, Sheree, and thank you, Alex. Have a good weekend.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.